Welcome to Liquidity Event Lessons. I'm Mike Ross.
I'm Ryan Ross.
Liquidity Event Lessons is all about what you should be thinking about and doing both pre and post sale of a business, certainly for the business, but really for yourself.
And today on the show, we have Adam Coffey. He's a private equity veteran with 20 years building businesses and managing companies. In the interview, we discussed concepts from his book, Empire Builder. It was designed specifically for this book. This interview is designed specifically for company founders who are building their businesses and they want to move to that next level. So let's talk about some things that we talked about in the show. A first chair player, whether that's a founder, a VP, director, to the conductor, which is a CEO or a chairman.
We also discuss how to manage the business using certain metrics so that you can best understand how the business is performing.
We rounded off with the discussion of what business owners might need to reconsider or consider when hiring experts to help them in due diligence when they begin the process of exiting their business. So, all right, here is the interview with Adam Coffey. Please enjoy. Shoot us any questions you have about it. We're happy to help out. If you are in the position of selling your business or want to talk about a liquidity event that is upcoming in your life. Thanks so much. Adam Coffey, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Last time you were on, you had probably the best 30-second, this is who I am. But just for people that haven't heard it, can you give us a 30-second, this is who I am again? Because it was so good.
I can't imagine there's anybody out there who didn't listen to the first podcast we did. But hey, in case you're that person, so 4 things about me. I'm rocking my Army sweatshirt here right now. So veteran U.S. Army. Hoo-ah to all my veteran friends out there. Military taught me something about discipline, teamwork, leadership. Engineering, and I'm an engineer, engineering and a pilot. Pilots don't take off unless they know where they're going. Engineers, meticulous planner. So all of that stuff built on top of the servant leader. I got out of the military, then spent 10 years at GE during the Jack Welch, the Camelot era. World's largest companies growing so fast, it's doubling in size every 2.8 years. That informed my thinking around 30% growth for any company is my minimal acceptable annual compound annual growth rate. So that was the GE days. GE taught me how to run a company. After that, I spent 21 years building 3 national companies for 9 private equity sponsors, bought 58 companies, have billions in successful exits as a CEO. Got bored, rotated out of the CEO seat, decided I wanted to impact multiple companies at a time rather than just build one. And so I started a consulting business. I now work with dozens of PE firms, and I think at last count, it was 52 entrepreneurs who are building companies, eventually going to be selling these, most likely to a private equity buyer. So that's kind of the minute and a half, 30-second version of me.
Yeah, I think people can take notes on that one again. It was really good. Nice and concise. I love it.
Well, so good to be here, Mike and Ryan. Good to be back with all your listeners.
Wonderful.
So Adam, when you and I originally spoke, after I'd read your first book, I asked you about how you wrote it, and you said, I wanted to write it a length that someone could hop on an airplane in New York and have it read by the time they landed in LA. I actually hopped on a plane at LaGuardia, and I had the new book read by the time I hit Denver. So it fits that profile. You fit it exactly like you did the first book, which was great. I've used the first book with clients on multiple occasions. But to the new book, one of the things, and you just alluded to it, you referenced literally, I'll tell you the page number, page 124, that you discussed your private equity consulting work. What kind of give me the profile of what a good consulting student is for you? Who is out there that should be talking to you about learning how to do private equity stuff?
Well, so first of all, you're either a private equity firm, and so you're a bunch of financial weenies. No, I mean that lovingly. You're a bunch of financial experts But you need help from an old crusty operator to try to help determine whether or not this is a good investment. What am I missing? I'm looking at numbers. What can you see by meeting, talking to the leadership team, looking at the same book I'm looking at? What are my risks? What's the what are the potential pitfalls that I need to uncover? So I work with PE to help them determine what a good investment looks like, typically in a services type business. When I'm working with entrepreneurs, it's, hey, eventually you're going to be selling to what most likely is a private equity buyer. And so you want to build your company to maximize its potential in advance of that exit. And remember, I help PE identify risk. I help entrepreneurs eliminate risk. So when PE buyers are looking at them, they get excited and they say, that's a PE portfolio company that I need to own, and I want it in my portfolio, and I'm going to pay up to get it. So I help one side of the table identify risk. I help the other side of the table eliminate risk. And I tell people, look, even if you don't sell to private equity, what you're going to get after you're done working with me is a better company that's growing faster and producing more capital, ability to invest in itself with a great culture, to take care of your employees. So that's kind of the profile.
Mm-hmm. More on the profiles idea. One of the concepts you talked about in the book was being a first chair player versus being a conductor. And I'm just curious about, is there like a mindset shift that needs to happen in order to go from one to the other?
It's interesting you mentioned that. So first of all, Mike, I got to just congratulate you because you're a fast reader, because Empire Builder is probably 8,000 words longer than the private equity playbook was. And so if you knocked that out LaGuardia to Denver, you didn't even get across the country, brother. You were reading fast. So congratulations on that. And, going back to your question, it's so difficult today's world to be successful as an entrepreneur. So when you're starting out, like just use our stats here in the United States, 33 million small businesses in the US today. They represent 99.9% of all companies in the country, and they employ 50% of the workers in the country. Yet only 7% of those businesses ever hit $1 million in revenue. And so 93% of the people that start, this adventure of entrepreneurship never even get to $1 million. Only 4% of the people that get to $1 million get to 10 million. And so success is difficult. And one of the things that makes those people, those rare exceptions that get to $1 million, get to 10 million successful, is the fact that they're anal retentive control freaks. And as they're starting something, the magic that got them out of the gates, they controlled every facet of the business in order to see it go through those early, stages of growth to hit those kind of milestones. And as a result of that, it's just ingrained in most entrepreneurs' psyche that I got to control everything. I got to be a control freak because that's what brought me here. That's what got me that initial success. And I found, in the 58 companies that I bought, there were a few outliers. One was like 125 million, but most of them were around 20, $30 million in revenue in size. And all those entrepreneurs, very successful people, they beat the odds, but eventually they kind of hit a glass ceiling on growth, and they top out around 20, 30 million because they are managing the minutia and they are control freaks, which made them successful. They run out of bandwidth and they don't have an ability to grow further. And I tell people, boy, the magic entrepreneur that can learn how to shift gears can go from 30 million to 100 or better, and then they're off and running on their way to $1 billion. And the basic difference, I'm not even a classical musical guy. I'll go see Andrea Bocelli once in a while with my wife, but it's like, I'm not a big concert, pianist guy, or classical music guy, but the orchestra is a perfect example. In each section of an orchestra, you've got the chairs, you've got the players. Well, the first chair player in every section is the best player of that type of instrument, that section of the orchestra. When you're the entrepreneur and a control freak, you're the first chair player in every part of your company. You're making sure that everything is happening according to your plan. You're the control freak. And if you want to bust through that $30 million ceiling and head off to 100 million plus, then you need to learn how to shift entrepreneurial gears, let go, start managing process, instead of minutia. Hire good people, surround yourself with good people, inspire them, articulate the vision, but then get out of the way, hold them accountable. You got to learn how to be the conductor of an orchestra. And the entrepreneur that can make that shift at about 20, 30 million, they're going to be the special people that actually create those unicorn exits, down the road.
Makes perfect sense. And that's hard to do, as I run into that myself a lot. Shifting to a different subject that I bump into all the time, Adam, you referenced, as you go through the due diligence process in terms of selling one's company, bringing in a collection of experts in accounting, finance, law, and the like. I guess my question is, I've seen people fail at this. Can you kind of give us some compare and contrast on those who have done this well and those who have done this poorly and have failed at it?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest problems. I wrote an article for Forbes about it. I call it the arrogance of success, the accidental arrogance of success. And so, hey, let's be honest, that person that built that business, they beat the odds. They were one of only 7% that beat 1 million. They may have been one of only the 4% of those that beat the 10 million. Their success is rare. It should be celebrated. But unfortunately, I see it happen too often where that entrepreneur who was successful in their business then somehow thinks that their success building that business translates to, I'm now an expert in everything. And I don't need, I can use, my lawyer I went to high school with, I played golf with on Saturdays, and he helps me with slip and falls. He helped me organize my LLC and, did my trust and my third divorce, whatever it is, it's like we have this little bit of an arrogance of success that we think we've arrived. We don't need help. And I tell people, boy, when you're selling your business, the other side of the table has got the world's most sophisticated investors on the planet, and they know what they're doing. And so I'll use some examples. In a purchase agreement, one business attorney may drop 5 word changes into an indemnification clause or some part of that purchase agreement on purpose. And I'm going to make it an egregious one-sided agreement. And I'm just going to throw it across. And what I'm expecting is the attorney on the other side to say, not on my watch, buddy, and mark these 5 things off. I'm no rookie. I know what the hell I'm doing, right? And when that thing comes back and those 5 words aren't touched and, their focus is in the wrong areas, well, then that, attorney knows, hey, look, I got a novice on the other side and I'm going to take, it's like, hey, we both have counsel. And yeah. I'm a good person. I start always with, let's start with an agreement that was fully negotiated with someone else. So I'll go to my shelf and I'll say, this deal kind of looks like that deal. Let's pull this fully negotiated deal off because I want to get to a closing table. And I don't want to start here. I want to start here so that I can limit the amount of time that the cab meter is running on the law firms. Let's get to fair, reasonable, and customary. But not every buyer's like me. And there are people out there who can detect in a matter of minutes that they're dealing with a novice, they're dealing with an unsophisticated advisory team, and they'll take advantage of that team, which is their right. Everybody's got counsel. They pass the bar. There's no reason why I can't write a one-sided contract for my client. And so I that's one example from a law perspective, but I see this happen too. So entrepreneur wakes up one day, they say, I'm 67, time to go, time to sell the business. And, let's do it. My phone rang, I woke up and said, I'm going to sell it. My phone rang and some random, private equity weenie, or some buy-side advisors on the other side. And what's the chances that I picked up the phone and that's the right buyer who's going to maximize my potential and give me the kind of deal I want that gets me strategically where I want to be in my life? And the answer is probably 0, probably 0%. And so I see this happen all the time. And then that entrepreneur, hey, he lives in California and he says, you know what, I'm going to sell right now. And my phone rang and I'm going, and I'm going to hurry up and buy a house in Nevada. And then I'm going to declare my residency as Nevada, and I'm going to try to game California out of their, 13% capital gains tax, on my $30 million sale. And let me tell you, the state of California is not going to fall for that one. And it happens every day. It's happened to me just in the last few years where an entrepreneur called me. He's like, hey, I'm going to buy a house over there. And I'm like, boy, it's like, this is not how the game's supposed to be played. We need to think about an exit, if ideally, 3 years in advance. Hopefully we started our business building it to a certain exit point or with an exit in mind. But if we didn't, it's okay. I can get a business ready to go in about 6 months. It's not it happens all the time. But ideally, we want to spend about 3 years. We want to clean up our financials. We want to bring in an accountant, an accounting firm that does transaction services, advisory work. I want to get a sell side Q of E done. I want to take Uncle Jimmy, who died 5 years ago, but still on payroll. I want to get him off payroll. My wife, who's never stepped in the company, but she's got a $200,000 a year salary. I got to get all my adjustments, right and in order. When I'm running my business, my goal is I don't want to pay taxes. When I'm selling my business, my goal is to maximize the value potential of that business. I need to identify all these adjustments, make sure my accounting is being done appropriately, get a sell side Q of E, talk to some investment bankers, find out what companies are selling for in my industry, who the potential universe of buyers is. I was working with a client just in the past month, and we're going to market. We talked to 7 different investment banks. We let 7 different investment banks pitch us. Each one of us told us who they think the top 30 buyers are. I now have this spreadsheet that's got, about 60%, kind of overlap and about 30% outliers, 40% outliers on each sheet. And it's like, this is probably my universe of buyers. And I've got 7 different reads on valuations. And although I'm only going to choose one banker, what I really have done is I primed the pump. And now these other 6 bankers, if they want to get paid, right, they got to hurry up and run to their favorite buyer and say, there's an asset coming to market, sign me up as the buy side advisor, and I'm going to get you into this process. And so bankers only make money if a deal closes. And so I'm priming the pump, getting the universe ready for this company that's coming to market. It's like there's all these intricacies and things that we need to think through. And unfortunately, most entrepreneurs just don't think ahead. It's like playing chess with Bobby Fischer and you're a novice. It's like you need to look and think 13, 14 moves ahead on this chessboard in order to play well. And unfortunately, too many entrepreneurs just don't take the time. They spend 20 years, 30 years building a business, but they don't take the time to exit it properly.
I have a question about switching things. So say you were talking about you work with a lot of companies and entrepreneurs that have companies that are maybe making 20, 30 million in revenue, and that level requires specific types of service providers, right? But eventually, if they do things right, they will graduate to higher levels of revenue, et cetera, but they may not want to. They've developed their relationships with those service providers, right? They're accountants, they're attorneys, et cetera. So they're like, I think I want to stay with them, but that might not be the best thing to do. Or maybe, do you have any advice for people that might need to graduate to other levels of service providers?
Sure. You can still go play golf, with your golfing buddy that you've been playing with for 20 years. But it's like, hey, as we mature, we have to be open to continuously learning and growing. And as entrepreneurs, as we're moving through various stages of growth. So I've got that $30 million revenue company. Let's say I'm doing 15% EBITDA, margin. So I've got 4.5 million, that I'm now selling. I'm bringing in a PE partner. Now I'm going to grow to, call it 15 million of EBITDA. Then I'm going to sell it to somebody who takes me up to 50 million of EBITDA. I'm going to be using their money. I'm an orchestra conductor on a large scale now. And I'll tell you that even with me, with leadership teams, there are times where, hey, we have people who've been in seats. They're holding titles in our organization and they were doing a really good job at a certain size. But as we've gotten bigger, the complexity has outgrown their capability set. And there are times where we need to top grade talent in our organizations. And so what we should want as an entrepreneur is always the best outcome. And that doesn't always translate to the people I'm comfortable with that I've been working with for a very long time. I may be working with a law firm that has a generalist, who handles many things for me, and they can still keep doing that because I'm still going to have legal needs. But when it's time to sell the company, I want an attorney who does nothing but buys and sells companies, as a part of their practice all day long, every day. And they've been doing it for decades. And And so they have the collective wisdom and knowledge of doing, transactional type work and putting together purchase agreements. They've been doing this for a long time. That's a specialist. There's a difference between specialist and generalist. If we need brain surgery to remove a tumor, we don't go to our dentist or our veterinarian and say, hey, I want to save a few bucks. Can you get rid of this brain tumor? We want the best brain surgeon on the planet. When it comes to medical, everybody seems to get the concept. But when it comes to business, we forget all about that. And we think anybody who's got the title attorney, or lawyer past the bar, they're all equally good and capable of doing my job.
Is there a point in which you need to start asking those questions, or what would they be?
I think in my book, The Exit Strategy, I kind of gave a list of, I put tables in of size.
Yeah.
When you get to this size, this is who you should call. You get to this size, here's who you should call.
Those are the swimming lanes, right?
Well, no, the swimming lanes are about who your buyer's most likely going
okay.
to be. And then when you sell it again, who that buyer is going to be. This was more about, if you're a certain size business, do you work with, so first of all, a $30 million transaction, I don't go to the number one law firm in the country and hire an attorney to take care of my $30 million transaction. They're used to doing $1 billion transactions. They're not going to be interested, in my deal. The largest investment banks aren't going to represent me in the sale of my $30 million enterprise value company. It's too small. So we have to have the right tool for the job. If I'm trying to kill a bug, on my roof, I don't need a tank. It would do the job, but it would also kill my house. So, we need to learn that there are, as we're getting bigger, there are the right size tool, I call it, for the job. And so if I'm a company at 20 million, 30 million, I'm probably looking at a local to regional law firm who maybe has 100 lawyers. They've got a business practice, within that law firm. And they do nothing but M&A, and they do nothing but M&A and buying and selling companies, and they do it with people my size. And so it fits, and if I'm 100 million, 200 million, well, I've moved up, and now I'm using, a larger law firm that maybe has 1,000 lawyers, and and they have many partners who are involved in the purchase and sale of companies. So it really just comes down to assembling the right team based on the size company I am. Small companies typically work with smaller advisory firms, but that doesn't mean they're less competent. They just match the size, the right tool for the job.
So Adam, let's kind of go from the financial and the transactional to talk about running businesses. One thing that has baffled me as time goes by, because I think it requires a level of criteria, your quote was, measure success at every level. So my question is, what have been, as you've run companies, what have been the most unusual metrics you've used to measure success?
Well, I'll certainly tell you that when it was common in my CEO days to walk into a company, or when I'm working with a client today, to walk into a company and they have no metrics. No one's measuring anything. We're looking at revenue. How's my sales team doing? Well, here was their goals. Here was their objectives. And so people start with nothing usually. And so I tell people, there's kind of two things. We need to keep score, because we got to know if we're winning. Right. And so I walked into a company, big company, been around for 40 years, wasn't really using, any meaningful type of metrics. It was unable to, because it had disparate data systems and just, it didn't even have an ERP platform at the time. And it had, over a couple $100 million of revenue, and it was running on like 8, Commodore 64s, and they had their, here's my finance pack. I'll put it in this Commodore 64, and here's my dispatch pack, put it in that one. It's like, it just no level of, I'm of course being facetious, but the no level of sophistication. So I walked in there, I said, do we know how many employees we have? HR department. Yes, because I cut paychecks and I got to do like my compliance. I got all my employee paperwork filled out. Yes, I know how many employees we got. Check. Okay. Do we know how much revenue we got? Accounting team. Yes. I got to know how much, revenue I've got, and I've got to report my taxes. It's like, yes, I know how much revenue I got. Great. We've got our first meaningful metric. It's going to be revenue per employee, and I'm going to start there. And when I'm thinking about productivity and enhancements, we'll keep going back to that bellwether, which is revenue per employee, and then it's like, okay, do we know how much net earnings we got? Yes, because the IRS, I got to report that, I got to report it to the state. Okay, great. I know how many employees I got. I know what my net, my net income is. I now have net income per employee. And so as I'm driving productivity, it's like, I'm trying to create some means of keeping score. And when I say do this at every level, if I'm a company filled with service technicians in trucks, I may be looking at, their, if it's a time and materials company, their billing, the average billing. So revenue per technician, becomes an early metric with me. Number of callbacks. So they went out to fix something and then they had to go back because they didn't do a good job or the problem came back. They didn't fix it right the first time. So I can talk about percent callbacks. I can talk about revenue per tech, so it's like we can create metrics. And I tell people for every job you have in a company, you should have 2 or 3 metrics that help these people understand if they're winning or losing. This is the productivity measures for this job. And if I've got a group of people doing the same work, well, I want to put all those people and rack and stack them based on who's doing it best, who's doing it worse, and where my bar is for the level I expect. And so these people are above goal. These people are below goal. This is the best. This is the worst. Why do I want to do this? I call it pay for performance. As I'm giving out raises, am I a socialist? Do I give everybody 3% because my budget was 3% for raises this year? Or do I give the best performer in that work group 6% because they're the best? And I give the person at the bottom 0 and tell them, look, buck up, it's time to get in the game here, and then think about it this way. Let's say I got 100 service techs and I have a fleet of 100 trucks and I'm buying 10 new trucks this year. Who gets the 10 trucks? Usually it's the people with the oldest trucks with the highest mileage. Well, not in my world. My world, it would be who's the 10 top, performing service techs who are on top of their metrics. Those people get my 10 new trucks and I shuffle the trucks down. And if you're a great technician and you're perennially at the top of the heap, you should get a new truck every year. It's like every year you're getting a new truck. Why? Because guys in trucks like trucks, they like new trucks. They like their tools. They get to go to training. It's like, we have to teach our people at a very high level that their activity matters to the success of the business. And when a company is growing and successful, it has money to give people raises, to give them new trucks, to send them to training, and to give them promotional opportunities as the business is expanding. And so, it's like we need to keep score. We got to have metrics. We need everybody in the company to have metrics on their own performance so they know if they're doing a good job or not. And we need that visibility to drive some competitiveness in a work group. And then we need to reward according to performance. And if we can do these things, let's assume now the economy goes south, I need to lay somebody off. Well, everybody knows who the best technician is and who the worst technician is. And if I lay off the worst technician, guess what? You can't sue me because of race, religion, age, protected class, this, that, the other, because I'm using, a metrics-based system, to decide who my winners and keepers are and who ultimately my losers would be. God forbid I have to be in a position where I'm not growing and I'm laying people off. Hope to avoid that to begin with. But that's, you're talking about metrics, we're talking about keeping score. That's the kind of vision that I'm creating. So they can be sophisticated, they can be unsophisticated.
How often should they change or be updated?
Well, I think core metrics, if you first of all, we can over measure the heck out of everything. So we don't want 500, KPIs, for every part of our business, because then we dilute the effectiveness of how people think about performance as it relates. So I always tell people 2 or 3 metrics per job, per job class. What are the 4 or 5 things that are just key? And I think for most businesses, you can live with a core set of metrics for an extended period of time. And so like that revenue per tech I talked about, I walked into this company, we had nothing. I start with revenue per tech, net income per tech. Those 2 metrics remained for the entire time I ran the company, which was over 13 years. And although we eventually invested, millions in ERP platforms and technology, it's like when a metric's working, we continue to use it and ride it, and people understand it. And I remember it's like, and a lot of people talk about it, that particular company, we were able to increase the performance of the business by over 40%. So employee productivity, revenue per person, revenue per employee, revenue per service tech, revenue per salesperson, revenue per, per this, per that. It's like we were able to see a 40% increase in employee productivity, and we were tracking that metric. So what we were adjusting in the business, and as it was growing, we were getting more productive using technology to solve, old antiquated manual processes in the company. As we were picking up steam and getting better, we kept looking back at that same metric. How are we doing now? Hey, we've had an increase, and so I'd say that good metrics don't necessarily have to change frequently. They can probably last a decade or more with a company. But that doesn't mean we're not open and looking for new things to measure.
Yeah.
Let's just not over measure.
That makes sense.
Ryan, you want to ask about the conference room table? That was one.
Sure. So I actually, if you could just expand upon that, right? To me, it sounds like the Jeff Bezos's pizza rule, but I think it might be slightly different. So can you tell us about what the conference table rule is?
Yeah. So what we're referring to is, in world, most companies of any level of sophistication have what I'll call just strategic plans. Here's the 5 or 6 initiatives we think are important to the future of the business. These are the ones we're going to track, we're going to push, we're going to implement, and we're going to align ourselves to work on all this stuff. And back in the Jack Welch era, it was kind of like we'd put together these strategic plans, we'd drive the heck out of them, but we never translated, I'll call it talent to value. So the value we wanted to see, who was the people in the company that we're going to drive and make that happen, and how are we going to think about hiring these people, incentivizing these people, and driving their behavior. Along comes a guy named Sandy Ogg, give him credit. CEO.works is .com or org. I'm not remembering, but the Sandy Ogg, if you Google him, you'll find him. Got some books on Amazon. He's the godfather of this thing called talent to value. At least in my mind, he is. And I learned a lot from him. So he started thinking about, okay, so we've got your typical strategic plan. We've got your 5 or 6 initiatives. Who in the company is going to focus on these things to make it happen? What kind of system are we going to put in place that ties human activity and, call it the people in the organization to the value creation plans that we put in place? And so, one of the simple ways to think about this, so, a company I walk into typically is going to have a handful of initiatives that are always going to be the same. So I'm going to be focused on driving organic growth. I'm going to do that with price, with volume, and with making strategic pivots, looking for ancillary revenue streams, other things I can sell the same customer base. I'm going to have a bucket for margin improvement, so process improvement, purchasing, I get bigger, I buy more stuff, I buy it at cheaper prices. I'm focused on process improvement, really, just kind of analyzing how a process works in the company. And as the company's grown and gotten bigger, can we redesign it to be more effective? Can we invest in technology to drive productivity? And so there's always margin improvement components. In any world I'm around, it's M&A is going to be a component of growth. I'm going to be buying companies. And as I'm buying companies, I'm harnessing synergies, and I'm creating arbitrage, as a part of getting bigger from a smaller company to a bigger company, buying a bunch of small companies at a low price, putting them together. The larger company's worth more because it's rarer, it's climbed the PE pyramid, and now bigger buyers look at it and they pay up because there's fewer companies of that size in any given industry that they can buy. And so the M&A is a component, but then I've got another organic growth component, which is going to be organic growth on the companies I buy. I have a whole strategy around cross-selling and putting science into thinking about M&A and how we should think about buying and integrating and expanding organic growth, both in the mothership and the acquired company. And so I've got these normal buckets of growth. What we do then is take that bucket of growth, let's say organic growth. I got volume, I got price. Well, who's going to, now think about a conference room table. Take these 2 initiatives and label a conference room table. This is the volume table for organic growth. This is the price table for organic growth. Who in our company of 50 employees or 1,000 employees is going to sit at that table to make volume happen? How are we going to get more bids out? How are we going to get our close rates up? What are we going to do to drive ancillary revenue streams? Are we going to tie service contracts to product sales? Can I create a recurrent revenue stream on a project-based stream that never had recurrent revenue before. I installed a bunch of stuff. I built something. Can I add a service component to it? And it's like, who are the people in the organization that would actually sit at the table to strategize, to come up with the ideas, and then to come up and implement those ideas to drive the growth that we ascribe to that table. So tables are the physical transformation of taking a strategic plan, laying it out now and saying, what people do we need in the company to focus on this? I'm going to give you an example. When I had my tables for my last company, I had 3,000 employees, but we identified that it was approximately 23 people out of 3,000 who would sit at these tables, and they would make about $2.5 billion with a B of shareholder value actually happen. And so normally when I'm running a company, I turn over the keys to the COO and say, you got day-to-day operations. We got to delight customers every day. We got to take care of our core commitments, need to keep running that base business. I'm going to then run the bend the curve and the growth initiatives, M&A. I'm going to focus on bending the growth curve and focus on hitting these growth, targets and trajectories. You're going to focus on that base business. And after I buy something, we integrate it, I throw it over to you. It's now a part of the base business, and we're going to get into this regular cadence of how we manage the base business and manage the components of growth. And I always do it now, since first working with Sandy a number of years ago. I now always do it in this fashion. And guess what? It works. It works really well. There was a high caliber, this high component of hit or miss. We'd make a strategic plan and it was our strategy, but we didn't really assign ownership to it, or think about it in terms, and Sandy took it to another level, and tables is the physical interaction of, here's my strategic plan. These are now the people in the company that own it. As a CEO, those 22, 23 people are going to be on my calendar with some level of frequency. I don't care if they're 3 level down in the organization, don't report to me, don't report to my direct reports. If they're one of these 23 people, they're going to be on my calendar. I'm going to make sure that I take a vested interest in them, in their career development, in making sure they've got the resources they need to succeed, because, it's not going to just be C-level people sitting at these tables. Matter of fact, that's the wrong place. It's like I think about price. What was the activity and price? I've got 50,000 service contracts already in existence, and the contract based language has changed every year for like the past, 10 years. And I've got some old contracts, new ones. It's like, I don't even know which contracts have price escalation clauses already built in, which ones don't. Where do I need new paper next time I renew? What should my paper look like of my base contract? I need a lawyer at the table. I need my director of contracts, at the table, because someone's going to have to go physically read 50,000 contracts to find out which ones have price escalation clauses, which one don't, what flavor of ice cream year vintage are these contracts. And we're going to have to now create some new technology in our ERP system to set the flags. So next time I need to know which contracts have a price escalation clause, I can push a button without reading 50,000 contracts. So we want to get to where it's the people who physically are going to be doing the work, managing and directly supervising the work. That's who needs to sit at these tables. And so that's the focus, and that's the methodology that Sandy developed. And I like it. It works.
It seems like this is also where you bring in the KPIs, I suppose, right? Because if you're at those tables, this is what we need to have. This is where we need to be, right?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. So it's, what were the units of growth? What are the initiatives? And then as soon as I do that, who's going to sit at the tables to make those initiatives happen? When those tables are constituted, the very first thing they have to do is decide, how are we going to measure success? What are the KPIs we need to track our progress? And then they can focus on tactical execution. What are the initiatives that we're going to try, in the organization? And then we'll use the metrics to keep score, and we'll make our tweaks, to process or to procedure. And then we'll watch the outcome and see if our action is having the right impact. And, and so all of this then gets tied together.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that there's no C-level people at the tables, and there probably shouldn't be, because you want to get the best sense of the of what's happening, right? And the way you sense it is by getting the people that are on the ground, feeling the product or feeling those processes, so you can refine them, right?
there are times where some C people will be at the table, but if I see the same name, if I got 8 tables and I see the same names on 6 of them, I've got people too high in the organization, and I'm not hitting this correctly. It's like I want to make sure also always that there's an executive sponsor that owns, or rides shotgun over each of these tables, because if I've got a director, of price who owns this price, category, first of all, most of my companies probably didn't have a director of price. And so I got an open, I also identify growth positions or positions in the company. I got an empty chair. There's probably somebody we need to hire, that has, this kind of a skill set to do this work. And so sometimes we identify also. So last time I did this, 23 people identified. 9 of the 23 positions were new positions that did not exist when I did it the last hold period and the last time out. And so what we do kind of morphs as the company's getting bigger too. But, it's like, if all I've got is the same people sitting at the same tables, I've not done this.
You did a different table.
Yeah. It's like, I'm mindful that there needs to be people who are close to the work at hand to be done. And so like on that growth volume table, if I have a chief revenue officer, they probably do sit at that table, but so do my vice presidents of channel, of my different products and services. I might have some marketing people there, because there it's all about how do I get more leads, more bids, higher close rate, and they'll drive, then the people in that room can drive the sales teams, the tactical execution. But like that price table, it's probably a director level person leading that table. And I'll assign an executive sponsor, because when the director goes to 3 division presidents and says, sir or ma'am, I need you to do this. And they look down and they're just like, you're
Who are you? What's your name again?
Who are you? Where are you from? And by what authority do you command me? And so I need that executive sponsor to say, excuse me, I'm the authority that commands you to listen to this person. So, but it's a fascinating way of really tying, what I will call strategic planning and turning it into tactical execution that's manageable. And it's worked quite well for me. And I know it works for a lot of other companies too.
Yeah.
Adam, you have kind of built your reputation in the private equity world, and yet in the book you reference that many people, maybe even 90%, don't even get what private equity is all about. Did I misread that? Is that obvious? Is that accurate, that there is a enormous percentage of business owners that have never even thought of the term private equity? Is that accurate?
I'll tell you that they've heard the term, but they don't know what it means. And so let me expound on that. So, every time I teach a seminar, every time I got a room full of people and the topic is private equity, I start my lecture or start my seminar by giving a simple 10-question quiz. And I have 5 answers instead of 4. So I eliminate the guesswork of statistic, of someone being able to pass by guessing. So I've got 5 choices. The proper answers are inside the private equity playbook, that first book that you read. These are all basic questions. These are not trick questions. They're basic questions. In a private, what's the typical lifespan of a private equity fund? And who's the limited partner and who's the general partner? And how to, it's basic questions like that. And every time I give that quiz, I'm talking a room filled with, MBAs, business owners, executives, 90% of the room fails the test. 90%. I've only had one person in the 10 years I've been doing this who scored perfect. And she read my book the night before, and she had an eidetic memory, and she got a 10. I don't know what else to tell you. She was a freak of nature, how smart this girl was. And so she got 10 out of 10, but most people who pass get 6 out of 10. And most people who fail get 1, 2, 3 right out of 10. And so what I'm demonstrating to them before I then get into educating them about private equity is I show them how much they don't know. And I point out things like, look, private equity is the world's largest source of non-bank, capital. Debt lending and equity, infusion, and private equity buys 50% of all companies on the planet. And on average, it doubles the stock market in terms of returns. And all we ever hear on the news is bad things about anything, let alone private equity. So, I hear all the private equity bashing, and I hear entrepreneurs, who answered the phone when it rang, sold their business to that company, didn't put the forethought planning in. Some had a good experience, some had a bad experience, but essentially it's an understood asset class. And it's because of private equity, we have an inflated private market to sell a business. Whether we sell a private equity or not, the fact that we're going to get a lot of money is because there is this market that they created. There's the financing that they created. And we really need to, if we want to be an astute entrepreneur and get the most out of that potential, we have to understand how it works, and we have to understand what its needs are and kind of what its built-in inherent flaws are, so I can manipulate and take advantages of them, and get what I want, which is capital and wealth creation. And I got to give them what they need, which is returns for their limited partners. And so, it's by better understanding how capital works, we can then be more successful as entrepreneurs. And so I just find that it's a highly misunderstood. You say private equity and people have visceral reactions and nobody knows how it works. And so that book was designed to educate a generation.
Gotcha.
Are there any assumptions people have that they're just way off?
Well, so let me start with one. So most entrepreneurs have this attitude. Again, I'll call it the arrogance of success. If I sell my company and stay as a minority shareholder, there's no possible way that these people are going to know what I know about running a company. Never going to happen. And I point them to Jeff Bezos, and I say, before the divorce and a recent drop in Amazon stock, Jeff Bezos was the world's wealthiest man, and he only owned 12% of Amazon. And so, today I think he owns 10%. It's worth 170 billion. I think he's the third richest person on the planet last time I checked. But here's a guy who owns 12%, of his company, which means 88% of other people own that business. He's the world's wealthiest man. If it works for Jeff Bezos, it can work for you, Mr. Arrogant young, entrepreneur who's got a company worth 30 million. And so the first misconception is, if I don't have control, it's not good, and I can't possibly make money or thrive or flourish. And I would show you that with institutional capital, and I talk about it in the book. I don't want to see any entrepreneur have a business worth more than $100 million who doesn't ring the bell, who doesn't create asset diversification and diversify their wealth base and become a minority shareholder, bring in institutional capital, accelerate the pace of growth, because you now have an unlimited checkbook and you can actually generate wealth faster with a partner than you can without the partner. The other problem entrepreneurs have then is when they get to be about 50, they start to slow down a bit, and they start to get worried. My horizon, I can see the end point at the end of the, light at the end of the tunnel. Now I don't want to invest in my business the way I should. Now I don't want to expand and focus on growth and do all those things I did as a young person when I was building the company aggressively, to create the business. I now want to shy away from all of that, and I start making bad business decisions because I'm not making good decisions focused on growth. But when I diversify my assets, I don't have to worry about that. I've got enough gold hidden in the tree that I'm good. I still have enough rolled forward to where I get a second bite of the apple that's bigger than the first, and I'm now using other people's money, OPM, to grow my empire, and I can be aggressive again, and I can swing for the fence instead of trying to hit a single. Mm-hmm. And I can make good business decisions. And so I think those are two areas. From a private equity perspective, I would also say that another problem that I see, and I wrote an article about this recently in Forbes. Here's a shocking statistic: 73% of entrepreneurs who sell their company to private equity do not survive the first 5-year hold period. Why is that? 73%. And I saw your eyes go up. It's like, that's the number, 73%. Well, first of all, there was a group of people who were at 70 and they sold their business and they plan to retire anyway. Yeah. But then of that group that's left, invariably, when we give them a wheelbarrow full of gold, we've got some people who think game over. I've arrived. I don't have to work hard anymore. I just got a wheelbarrow full of gold. Well, your private equity sponsor just gave you a wheelbarrow full of gold. They haven't gotten any gold from you yet, and they need you to actually double down and work harder than you've ever worked before to generate the returns they need to justify that investment by their shareholders in their fund, and they want you to work harder than you've ever worked before. This isn't time for relaxation. This is time to get back to work, brother. It's like, sister, time to make wealth happen for me, as your majority shareholder. And so I think a lot of people check out, after they get a wheelbarrow full of gold. And so I think people think too often that selling their business is a one and done event. I tell people it's a rest stop on the wealth creation highway. And when you're bringing in private equity, the level of game is going to increase dramatically, and the expectations are going to increase dramatically. And you got to gear up for spring training. You may have just won the Super Bowl, but it's spring training now, and it's time to get back to work. Or you won the World Series, Texas Rangers, but now it's like back to work. It's April, Matt Scherzer, my neighbor, get your ass back over there and start throwing the ball across the plate. I paid a lot of money and you disappointed me, during the World Series, you were hurt. It's like we got to get back to work. And so why do professional athletes train? Why do they go to spring trainings? Why do they have camps? Why do they practice? Because it's a high level. If you want to be a professional and win a championship, you got to be at the highest level. Well, if you're working with private equity, you're playing at the highest level of business, and you need to be on your A game. So
that's
these
awesome.
are some of the misconceptions I think people see.
Well, this has been another whirlwind. You've shared a lot of knowledge. When's your book coming out, by the way?
Book's out. It hit number one in 15 countries in the first 24 hours.
Wow.
So God bless my friends in Australia, because the day came first in Australia. They were the first people to make it number one. And I had this weird thing happen, so there was a time in Australia where the top 8 books in the country at the same time were all written by me.
No.
And I've only written 3 books.
That's
so
cool.
That means that there was hardcover, soft cover, audio book, paperback. It's like the top 8 spots in the country were all held by me at the same time, with my 3 books. And so
that's cool.
So
did you read the book?
The book that I wrote, unfortunately, I read it, 1,000 times. Eventually you get to a point to where it's like, my brain's fried, pencils down, it's done. And I'll tell you that some people may not know this, but when the early press runs came out, I had to rewrite the audio for the audiobook script. I rewrote the final. It was already off to the publishers and being run. It's like I discovered like 5 mistakes when I did the final read through. Like it was like supposed to be greater than, it was less than, symbol, a picture, something I didn't catch, an editor couldn't possibly know, because I'm the content expert. I caught 5 errors. And so we scrambled to get those 5 errors changed. And it's kind of like a movie blooper. You watch a movie for the 30th time and you're like, hey, did you see that Charlton Heston has a Rolex watch on when he's parting the Red Sea? And Moses didn't have, it's stuff like that. And so I got them all corrected, but the first editions that hit the shelves that people bought, there were these 5 little errors, and then we got them corrected, but yes, I read this book too many times to where I could look straight at the same mistake time in and time out and not recognize it. But when I was writing the audiobook script for the voice talent, Ron Butler, it's like if I say, refer to this diagram, well, there is no diagram in an audiobook. So I have to describe, the diagram. And so you have to change. And so I had to read it with one last meticulous eye after the final was already off to the publishers and printers. And it's like, oops, here's a mistake. So yes, I did read it. And eventually I go brain dead.
Yeah, I bet Dad can empathize with that. He read his book, which has a much more complicated name. Yours is easy to say. Anyways, well, Adam, thanks so much for your time. How can people find you, by the way?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every day. Website, adamcoffey.com. I've got another one, adamecoffey.com. It's like, but it doesn't take much to find me. And I'm most responsive on LinkedIn, to be honest with you. People reach out to me every day. I'm on LinkedIn every day. And I happily interact, with the public.
Do you have a next book in mind?
So I've got a few that are done. I'll call them done. What I've got is the fully blown outlines in the can. So I start with, and usually they start as a lecture. So I'm going to perfect them in, kind of in a seminar format, lecture format, and then I'll revisit those. But, one of them was called Life Lessons from the Corner Office. And so it's just kind of a not necessarily a coherent book of from X to Y, but just, hey, here's the things I learned 20 years as, 20 plus years as a CEO, and just kind of a bunch of different anecdotal type lessons. It's interesting because the topics come from you. They come from readers. They come from listeners. They come from people I'm interacting with, and I see the need, and then I pounce on it. And I
that's much better than just being like, people are going to love this. I don't know if they will, but I think they will.
I try to solve real problems for people that I'm working with, and if I see a pattern, that becomes a potential, for a seminar and a book. And so my timeline is, Private Equity Playbook 2019, Exit Strategy 2021, and then 2023 for Empire Builder. So I get to take a year off after a book launch, and then, then I go back at it. I don't stop working. I work every day. I work more today than I did as a CEO, but I take a year off of writing, and then I let that book kind of get out there and work its way around. And then about a year in, I start focusing, okay, time to get something, something going. What's this going to be? What am I hearing? I'm working and interacting with all these hundreds of entrepreneurs. It's like, what are they telling me? What's the issue or problem of the day? Can I help them solve it? And that's how I do it.
Well, we will look forward to the next one. Hopefully we can interview you for that one as well. So Adam Coffey, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Figure 2025.
Okay, we'll give you that.